known and unknown. We've already talked about the way some that CIA were leaking. Quote, news stories, known and unknown, repeated the widely believed canard that the State Department had been cut out of post-war planning. The stories bore the unmistakable fingerprints of Powell's top aides, close quote. Mm-hmm. You've got CIA leaking to such an extent that you're protecting yourself against being implicated in these leaks. You've got the Secretary of State's top aides leaking.
I can't know where it looked like it was.
It sure looked like it to you.
Yeah.
Well, this looks like
And I told my people, we will not leak. It's not professional. It's not fair to the president. It's not fair to the administration.
How does that work? How does it work? Do you, as Secretary of Defense, get on the phone? Of course, there are deep historical and institutional reasons why defense and state are at odds and have been under various different secretaries. Cap Weinberger, George, it goes way back.
Right.
But do you get on the phone and say, what the heck is going on? You did.
I did it in person.
All right. Without satisfaction.
I kept on.
All right.
And I don't suggest that Colin Powell was doing it.
No, but you use
Some people over there.
his top eight. All right. It's just the feeling, this is no surprise to you, the war's not going as expected. The president is defensive before this notion that he lied, people died, and the administration itself appears to be in disarray. People, I'm trying to grasp here, I'm thinking again of this, I'm thinking of the Princeton senior as you were in 1954 when Adlai Stevenson gave that speech that so inspired you. What is the lesson here? What is the lesson here?
I think there are a lot of lessons here. I think that, for one thing, it's about time that we recognize that the institutions we're dealing with were fashioned in the 1940s, the late 1940s, in the Truman administration. I mean, that's where
National Security Council is
CIA, National Security Council, the old USIA, all of those mechanisms were designed at the inflection point between the end of World War II and the beginning of the Cold War. We're now in the information age. We're now in the 21st century. They've served us reasonably well for 50 years. It's time, it seems to me, to have another Hoover Commission like existed and get a bipartisan group of people to sit down and look at these things. Same thing with the international institutions. The United Nations, NATO, the World Bank, the IMF, all of those were fashioned in the same period after World War II.
Two more personalities here that you write about. One, Paul Bremer, who was head of the Coalition Provisional Authority, and you take after him for moving slowly, particularly with regard to giving authority to Iraqis themselves. I'm quoting known and unknown. Most troubling was that Bremer proved reluctant to cede any significant authority to the Iraqis, close quote. Fred Barnes of the Weekly Standard, who likes you and enjoys this book and wrote a wonderful review of the book, included, though, his feeling that, I don't know. I'm quoting Fred Barnes. Bremer created the Iraqi Governing Council to advise him. In May 2004, a year after Bremer arrived, the IGC names Ayad Alawi prime minister. In 2005, this is less than 2 years after he arrived, there's a full-fledged Iraqi parliament. Quote, Fred Barnes, that strikes me as a reasonably fast transition, close quote.
Well, first of all, let's say this about Jerry Bremer. Now, he's an able person. He was willing to take on that tough job, and a lot of good things happened under his tenure at CPA, at the Coalition Provisional Authority. There is no question, but that we differed as to the pace at which things would happen. And if you look in my book, I discuss the fact that most of the things I say about Bremer's pace came out of Bremer's book. I use his own words. He was very reluctant to give authority. He didn't think they could manage authority very well. He said that in his book. My attitude was, and I know the State Department agreed with Bremer, that they wanted to go at a slower pace. They connected, for some reason, the idea of a legitimacy of the government with a slower pace. My attitude was that you gain legitimacy by how well you perform, and if you don't perform well, you get changed. And so I try to discuss it in a analytical way, and there were differences. I also think there was
in my reading, you're extremely respectful.
I wanted
pretty nearly everybody except Nelson Rockefeller, and there you didn't get along well with Nelson Rockefeller. That's a separate program. In other words, you're not out there slinging people at all.
No. This is a book that I intend for people to better understand government and the history of what actually took place, which is why there are hundreds of documents on the website that support what's in this book.
One more person. National Security Advisor Condoleezza Rice, quoting you, known and unknown. Rice seemed to believe that it was a personal shortcoming on her part if she had to ask the president to resolve an interagency difference, close quote. Now, I believe it's plausible on the evidence just of this conversation to say, over there at the Pentagon, we have a tough, smart, hardworking Secretary of Defense. We have a capable person in Iraq in the person of Paul Bremer, and Colin Powell is a seasoned veteran and a patriot. And the three of these people disagree on very important matters. Why doesn't the National Security Advisor say, fellas, we're going to Camp David, or we're going to the Situation Room, and we're going to have this discussion in front of the President of the United States?
I don't know why it didn't happen. It would have been better in retrospect had it happened. They're all honorable people. It may very well be that what Condi Rice was, the way she was managing it, was exactly what the president wanted. I don't know. I know she had a very close relationship with the president, and that was one of her strengths, that he had a lot of confidence in her. And she dealt with him every day, hours every day. And we didn't. We were out running departments and doing what we do.
Flying to Afghanistan.
Yeah,
right.
and totally different sets of responsibilities. But from where I was sitting, my impression is that when I met with the president, it seemed to me he was perfectly willing to make decisions. If you served him up and there were different opinions, he'd say, well, let's do this instead of that. And that he was very comfortable making decisions.
Okay.
But some things just didn't get served up to him that way.
Well, last question, I promise, about the notion of the function of the administration, how decisions got made. And let me ask it in the guise of giving you two quotations from known and unknown. I hardly need to keep holding this up since you're already number one on the New York Times bestseller list, but I'll do it. I'll do it. An August 2002 memo from you to Condoleezza Rice that you excerpt in this book and that is undoubtedly in full on your website. Quote, you to Condoleezza Rice, it sometimes happens that a matter mentioned at an NSC meeting is said to have been decided because it elicited no objection. That is not a good practice, close quote. Also from known and unknown, you, in your own words, while President Bush and I had many discussions about war preparations, I do not recall his ever asking me if I thought going to war with Iraq was the right decision. Not one person in NSC meetings at which I was present stated or hinted that they were opposed to the decision. I took it that Bush assumed, as I did, that each of us had reached the same conclusion. So you really let Condi have it because important decisions weren't discussed, weren't made explicitly, and yet the president of the we're just assuming.
I didn't let Condi have it at all. I said, look, when whoever's doing the minutes of these meetings, it would be a mistake to assume something was agreed to unless it was raised as an issue and discussed and agreed to. Simply because something was mentioned and then not commented on ought not to be taken as assent. That is what the first thing means.
Right.
The second thing is disconnected from that, and it basically was people have suggested that certain people in the NSC were for the war or against the war. I never heard anyone in the NSC express an opinion for or against it. And I don't remember the president asking Colin Powell or Condi Rice or the vice president or me.
Here's the question. Here's the question. Lord knows I'm not challenging you on the facts. I'm trying to understand. I'm groping for lessons here. Would it have been better if the president had asked? I guess what I'm saying is, in these decisions, where is the President of the United States? Why is he permitting this jostling to take form?
There wasn't jostling.
Well, between you and Colin Powell and Paul Bremer?
Well, there are always differences of opinion. There's nothing wrong with that.
And that was at a perfectly acceptable level.
That's happened, as you said, between Kissinger and Bill Rogers, or Kissinger and Schlesinger, and Schultz and Weinberger, and Brzezinski and Vance. There's nothing wrong with that, having differences of opinion. You'd expect that in a National Security Council. Well, the thing, though, is to have those discussions and have them presented in a way that's orderly and then have them decided. To the extent they drift, they tend to be fought out in the press by people 2 and 3 and 4 layers down. And to the extent something can be crystallized and brought to the president and decided, then people salute and say, fine.